Welcome to No Better Death, the podcast that knows while you can die no better death than your own, that doesn't mean we can't take a look for the unusual and the noteworthy in the deaths of others. Each episode will take an in-depth look at some out-of-the-ordinary deaths and the events surrounding them. This show will contain explicit language and graphic details. This is No Better Death, and I'm Sick Grayson. And this is my Aaron Mankey voice. Do you guys listen to Aaron Mankey's stuff? Lore, Cabinet of Curiosities, and Unobscured? Love his stuff. I was binging Cabinet of Curiosities the other day, and I noticed the 30th episode of that show, Aaron talks about the London beer flood, which we talked about on the very first episode of No Better Death. And since I heard it, I've been doing like, I did a thing he did, so I must be smart too, and walking around doing the voice. I know it doesn't really sound like him, it's just more the cadence of how he talks, which is way better than what you get from me on this show, so he's more than welcome to cover any material I've ever covered, because it definitely sounds better coming from him than me. And this is part 2 of Bad Medicine. I'm recording directly after recording part 1. Like, I seriously, I just hit stop. I opened up a new project file, took a few puffs of the old e-cig here, and just gonna skip the intro and get right into the continuation of the stories. Though in the time between preparing that last script and this script, I did see a story about a guy that got stabbed at a haunted house. A haunted house worker in Madison, Tennessee handed a lady a fake knife and motioned to her to like stab her friend beside her. So she did. And it turns out that the knife wasn't fake. She stabbed her homie in the arm and he left the hospital with 9 stitches. The worker has been placed on leave and said he didn't know the knife was that sharp. Even if you didn't know it was that sharp, I mean, it shouldn't be sharp. How about the fact you didn't know it was real? That's the question. You either knew it was real and thought it was dull and would be okay to use it as a prop, which means you're stupid, or you thought a real knife was a fake knife, which means you're stupid. There's no getting around that. But, I do feel like maybe I stumbled and rushed through the last episode, like I was talking too fast and kind of tripping over my own words. Probably because I'm trying to record 2 episodes in one day, plus bank a sick reads for the future. So I'm going to try to slow down and read and speak a little more clearly this episode. But how'd you like those last 3 stories? We had tetanus lace diphtheria medication, toxic anticoagulants, and lethal antibiotics. Makes you a bit weary to take your meds next time you get a prescription, right? I've got 4 more stories here, maybe some side notes. I'm not really sure. It just depends on how we do for time. But I do have 4 stories lined up for you here. First up, something a little more modern. We're talking the New England Compounding Center meningitis outbreak of 2012. In September 2012, an outbreak of fungal meningitis was reported in the U.S. The CDC traced the outbreak to fungal contamination in 3 lots of medication called methylprednisolone, which is used for epidural steroid injections, like for disc herniations, spinal stenosis, stuff like that. It's a back shot. The medication was packaged and marketed by the New England Compounding Center, a compounding pharmacy in Framingham, Massachusetts. Now, a compounding pharmacy is a little different from a regular pharmacy. These pharmacies have clearance to alter ingredients to make a sort of custom medication for specific patients, as opposed to how other pharmacies operate under strict rules not to alter anything. You get the medicine that comes in, you send it out, that's it. You don't touch anything else. This place had a little more freedom in mixing up medications. Doses from these 3 lots had been distributed to 75 medical facilities in 23 states, and doses had been administered to about 14,000 patients after May 21st, but before September 24th. Patients began reporting symptoms in late August, but because of the unusual nature of the infection, clinicians did not begin to realize the cases had a common cause until late September. Infections other than meningitis were also associated with this outbreak, which spanned 19 states. By March 10, 2013, 48 people had died and 720 were being treated for persistent fungal infections. In November 2012, some patients recovering from meningitis were reported to be experiencing secondary infections at the injection site, although no cases of infection were reported to be associated with any other lots of medication. All lots of all medications distributed by NECC were recalled in separate actions by NECC and regulators. Subsequent analysis identified some contamination in other lots. In all, 76 people died and 800 were sickened. In October, the investigation revealed that the NECC had been in violation of its state license because it had been functioning as a drug manufacturer producing drugs for broad use rather than filling individual prescriptions. That same month, members of Congress asked federal health officials for briefings on the outbreak as a first step toward possible legislative action to strengthen federal drug safety regulations. And in November, members of a congressional committee investigating the outbreak accused the FDA of failing to prevent the crisis by moving too slowly against the Massachusetts pharmacy. FDA Commissioner Margaret Hamburg testified that the agency's efforts to address problems at the compounding center had been hamstrung by congressional interference, conflicting court rulings regarding FDA jurisdiction, and tenacious litigation by the compounding center itself. And she wasn't wrong. Technically, the NECC was under the jurisdiction of Massachusetts authorities, not the FDA. At the same hearing, the co-owner of NECC chose to plead the fifth, refusing to answer all questions. By mid-December 2012, over 400 lawsuits had been filed against NECC, and federal prosecutors charged 14 former employees, including President Barry Cadden and pharmacist Glenn Chin, with a host of criminal offenses, including mail fraud. Mail fraud. What the fuck? Mail fraud. Racketeering, and more. It alleged that from 2006 to 2012, NECC knowingly sent out drugs that were mislabeled, unsanitary, or contaminated. While all this is going on, the state of Massachusetts conducted surprise inspections of 5 more compounding centers, which revealed problems including sterility concerns, resulting in at least 2 of the centers being shut down. By December 2012, NECC filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They went out like Toys R Us. Chin was arrested in September 2014 for his part in the debacle, which included authorizing improper sterilization and testing techniques, unsafe practices, falsifying cleaning logs, and using mislabeled vials. So the gist at this point is 76 dead, 800 sick, and this place was operating as a manufacturer, which it was not allowed to do. The regulations for manufacturer are vastly different from those of a pharmacy. The number of laws they broke here are uncountable. All of them, really, they broke any law around manufacturing drugs and operating a pharmacy. But what exactly led to the deaths of all those people? The CDC traced the outbreak, as I said earlier, to contaminated medications coming from this place that were used for steroid injections. The FDA examined foreign materials from unopened vials under microscope and found fungal matter. The fungus was found in the cerebrospinal fluid of several patients, which confirmed fungus caused the meningitis. The medication was packaged and marketed by NECC. According to the CDC, between May 21st and September 24th, 2012, patients in 23 U.S. states received injections from 3 implicated lots of the steroid, and some of those patients developed symptoms consistent with fungal meningitis. This form of meningitis can be caused by epidurally administered medications but is not contagious by person-to-person contact. On October 9th, authorities estimated as many as 14,000 patients may have been exposed to the contaminated drugs. The NECC said that immediately after it was notified about the infections, it initiated a voluntary recall. On October 4th, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health issued a recall of all NECC medications, advising hospitals and clinics to remove and segregate all lots from their inventory. NECC also announced on that day that they were suspending all of their operations and voluntarily surrendered their licenses to the Massachusetts Department of Health and Human Services while continuing to cooperate with the ongoing investigations by the CDC and the FDA. By October 15, 2012, the FDA issued a warning that 2 more drugs may have been contaminated, both coming from NECC. One was a steroid called triamcinolone something. I can't pronounce half of this stuff. And the other was a product used during heart surgeries. If injected, the second steroid may cause fungal meningitis, while the heart drug may cause a different fungal infection. So basically, dirty. All this company's drugs were dirty due to whatever poor sanitary conditions were going on in their place of business. Fungus got into the medication. The medication with fungus was injected into people's spines, and it caused fungal meningitis. And meningitis is no fun. Symptoms include fever, headache, stiff neck, nausea, vomiting, sensitivity to light, weakness, numbness, and confusion. This gives way to swelling of the brain and spinal cord, which can lead to coma and death. Although no cases of infection were reported to be associated with any other lots of medication, all of their medications were pulled from the shelves, as stated earlier. Subsequent analysis identified some contamination of other lots. 85 patients had lab-confirmed fungal infections that included various species of fungi, but most gnarly of them all was black mold, which was rare, if ever, identified or involved in any case of meningitis, and it really pushed treatment into unknown territory. They didn't know if current antifungal medications could take out black mold. Black mold isn't usually found in medicine. Whatever the sanitary conditions at the New England Compounding Center were, it had to be bad if they had black mold to the point that it got into the medication. Black mold will kill you. People have had to demolish entire houses because of black mold. It's no bueno. The other molds, while common in the air we breathe and the soil we grow our food in, typically don't cause health issues. It can be lethal to those with a weakened immune system, especially when injected into the spine. So even though some of these molds weren't bad, they were actually common, they could still fuck up a kid or an old person or someone who's not in peak physical health. The weirdest thing of all, almost every patient was infected with a different kind of mold. That's how much mold was in this building. That's how many strains or species there were, that almost every patient had different ones. The black mold seemed to be the one most common between all the people. That was the killer, the kicker, the cruncher, the clincher, whatever you want to call it. There's like 50 different kinds of mold, plus this one strain of black mold running through everything. But it gets worse. Meningitis wasn't the only infection caused by this stuff. That's just what the people with spinal injections got. There were other patients that got injections to the knees, shoulders, ankles, and other joints who, while they had avoided getting meningitis, got some really bad infections. And not only that, but the people who were treated for meningitis and released from care ended up returning back to their doctors due to infections at the injection site. They had a secondary infection from the shot itself. And if they didn't take care of that infection, it would lead to them getting meningitis again. The whole thing would just start over. And this messed up a lot of people. You've got meningitis. Okay, we fixed it. Well, now you've got an abscess and skin and muscle infections where you were injected. Okay, got that taken care of. But now you've got nerve inflammation. That's right. Even after meningitis and the infection, a lot of people came down with nerve inflammation. If it's not one thing with this case, it's another. When all they wanted, they just went to see their doctor about some back pain. My heart always goes out to people that get screwed over by the medical community. You needed help. You were in pain. You just wanted a moment of relief so maybe you could get a few hours of decent sleep or play with your kids for once. And instead you're handed diseases that were worse than what you came in with. And this happens all the time. Those who were able to make it through the meningitis and not die had to take antifungal medications for anywhere from 3 months to a year. And this was, of course, after the CDC decided what the best course of action should be. Clinicians, doctors and medical staff were so unaccustomed to dealing with fungal meningitis in modern times, especially one caused by a black mold, that most of them didn't even know what to do. They had to wait for the CDC to give them a course of action before coming up with any kind of treatment plan for these patients. And what now? What happens in the end? You did a bunch of stuff you weren't supposed to do. You made and sold medications you weren't authorized to make and sell, kept your facility so dirty that mold got into everything, sold the medications from the contaminated facility, killed a bunch of people, and messed up a lot of others. What happens? You go to court. Legal proceedings began in 2012 and stretched on until 2017. That's right, this wasn't resolved until October of last year. NECC and various employees were indicted on 131 counts of various crimes related to the outbreak, including 25 counts of second-degree murder. NECC President Cadden was convicted of racketeering charges but acquitted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 9 years in prison. In October of 2014, Chin was convicted of racketeering and mail fraud while also being acquitted of murder, and I couldn't get any information on how long he was sentenced for, but I'd have to assume it was at least the same amount of time Cadden received. Director of Sales Robert Ronzio pled guilty to conspiracy charges not related to the outbreak. Majority owner Carla Configliero and her husband Douglas pled guilty to dumping their bank accounts to avoid financial reporting requirements. Combined, the couple received 3 years probation and fines of about $60,000. That's all they came down with. They somehow weren't held responsible for the deaths or the condition of the facility. They got brought up on tax evasion, basically. And a $200 million settlement plan was approved for the victims and their families. 76 dead, 800 sick, countless laws and regulations broken, and ultimately all they had to pay was $200 million. We've seen it come up time and time again in just 7 short episodes: corporate negligence. It's weird that when it comes to benefiting from the law, we treat companies and corporations as people, but when it comes to paying for their crimes, we treat them like ghosts, and they receive no punishment. A multi-billion-dollar company gets a $20 million fine. You see it all the time when a company ends up polluting a river or destroying a town or something. It's just like, oh, well, you dumped 100,000 tons of poison into the river and killed the fish. $20 million fine. That's it. When if a normal person poisoned an entire ecosystem, they'd go to prison for the rest of their life. But for stuff like this, we act like there's no one to punish. 3 people went to jail for less than a year, and a company that had to file bankruptcy was ordered to pay a few dollars for affecting the lives of almost 1,000 people. It's fucking hypocrisy at every turn. Treat companies like people when it's good, act like they don't exist when it's bad. And it's never going to change because we've become complacent. We don't want to rock the boat. I read an article a few days ago, and this happened recently, that said the German government tried to raise gas prices, and millions of Germans just left their cars sitting on the highway. They drove out into the streets, the interstates, just wherever there was roads. They parked their cars, and they walked off and left the cars there until the government agreed to pull back gas prices. Imagine if we did that in America. What kind of change could that affect? The government and big companies in this country think they can do whatever they want to us because we stopped fighting back a long time ago. But we could change our economy, our medical system, our education system, the foundations and core of our country if we just take a stand against shit like this. 300 people with signs on Capitol Hill can be ignored. 300 million people on Capitol Hill, 300 million people clogging the highways, 300 million people tossing a rock. Shit would change. Would you participate? Would you stand up for what you know is right? I've done the math, and at best this country has about 5 million military and police force versus over 300 million citizens. Just saying. However, something good did come of this. In 2013, Congress, as a result of this incident, did pass a bill giving the FDA more oversight of pharmacies in an attempt to avoid things like this in the future. So it clarified their jurisdiction. The lady that spoke for the FDA earlier said they kept being hindered by it wasn't their territory. The pharmacy fell under state supervision or state agencies, not a government agency, and that all got cleared up in 2013 after this. Okay, all right. To quote Matthew McConaughey, next story, toxic cough syrup. And this was what I alluded to in the last episode about diethylene glycol and counterfeit materials. In this story, it turns out that diethylene glycol will be used as the counterfeit material. Let me tell you, as a teenager in bumfuck Mississippi, I've drank my share of cough syrup for reasons other than health. And I thought I knew about bad cough syrup. I drank a generic brand of Robitussin DM once that gave me purple shits for like 6 hours. It was unbearable, man. I was in pain and completely out of my mind, which is not a good combo. But what happened here in this story is far, far worse than me shitting into a garbage can in my friend's basement while having a wide-awake dream about singing owls. And yes, that happened. It got a little weird that time. Never buy generic Robitussin at an Albertsons grocery store if you happen to shop at the like 3 Albertsons grocery stores that are left. But the story isn't about me drinking cough syrup for fun when I was a teenager. This story is about 2007, toxic cough syrup in Panama, and our friend diethylene glycol from the elixir sulfonilamide story in the last episode. So the main focus of this story is on Panama, but from what I gathered in the reading, the glycol that caused the deaths in Panama was actually shipped from a manufacturer who wasn't a manufacturer, and it was shipped to multiple countries, killing over 400 people, most of them children. The main focus of this story is on Panama, but from what I gathered in the reading, this was actually shipped to multiple countries, killing over 400 people. A New York Times investigation tracked the glycol, which had been passed off as glycerin, to a Chinese tailor with a 9th grade education, a chemistry book, and a set of fake credentials that said he was allowed to manufacture this stuff. When the tailor, Wang Guiping, shipped the toxic substance labeled TD glycerin, which in China means glycerin substitute, to 3 different continents, it passed through at least as many trading companies, none of whom tested the contents and all of whom changed the shipping records. And it went undetected until a Panamanian doctor traced a wave of deaths to its presence in cough syrup. Somewhere along the way, a Spanish middleman changed the customs declarations to outright say glycerin rather than TD glycerin. The TD glycerin equals glycol, glycerin substitute. This stuff is usually found in antifreeze, as in don't drink this, it's fucking antifreeze. It's a cheaper version of the safe-to-consume glycerin commonly used in medications and food, but with one major difference. Glycol causes MODS, and no, I don't mean doofuses and blazers and hats listening to New Wave. MODS stands for Multiple Organ Dysfunction Syndrome. Basically, it shuts down your organs. The kidneys fail first, then the nervous system begins to misfire, paralysis sets in, making breathing difficult, then impossible, then you die. And this happens a lot. As of 2007, toxic syrup had been a factor in at least 8 mass poisonings in the previous 20 years, having killed untold thousands, mostly in Panama, China, Haiti, Bangladesh, Argentina, Nigeria, and India, with most of the toxic stuff coming from China, which is a major source of counterfeit drugs. Why not? They counterfeit clothes, electronics, toys, pretty much everything, so why not drugs? In 1995, 50 tons of this shit was shipped to America, where luckily it was caught before being put into any medicine. 95, I would have been 13, which was prime time for the age this stuff can kill you. You know, kids and old people is who this stuff always affects the worst. So kind of glad they caught it. Never know if I would have ended up drinking this stuff. While this story is not unique, Panama happened to have been the most recent victim as of 2007, when government officials unwittingly mixed diethylene glycol into 260,000 bottles of cold medicine with devastating results. Over 365 deaths were reported before the rainy season set in, which made it harder to exhume and test recently buried bodies to get an actual correct body count. So there's the number they have is 365, but it's suspected to be in like the dozen of thousands. So who was Mr. Wang, the guy who made this stuff and shipped it out? And yes, internally I am getting a very hearty chuckle at the fact his name is Wang. But this is some serious shit, so I'm not going to laugh right now. Who is this asshole that sells toxic chemicals as medical grade ingredients? He spent years as a tailor in the manufacturing towns of Tangxi Delta in eastern China, but he didn't want to be a common craftsman. He set his sights on trading chemicals, a business rooted in the many small chemical plants that sprouted up in the region. He didn't know what he was doing, his brother told reporters. He doesn't understand chemicals, but he did understand how to cheat the system. So this is just some guy. He was a tailor's apprentice. He knew making clothes, but that didn't make enough money. He wanted to get into chemical trading where the big bucks were in the area he lived. And that is totally accurate. I mean, China is largely a manufacturing country, manufacturing things for the rest of the world, and that includes chemicals and medicines and stuff. It's big business there. And this guy wanted to get his slice of the pie. He realized he could earn extra money by substituting cheaper industrial-grade syrup for the pharmaceutical-grade syrup. To trick pharmaceutical companies, he forged his licenses and laboratory analysis reports. He later told investigators that he figured no harm would come from the substitution because he initially tested a small quantity. Now remember, he's a tailor, not a chemist, so his test didn't mean shit. He swallowed a little bit of it, and when it didn't kill him, he assumed it was good to go and started shipping the stuff out to buyers who found his listings on industry websites. They went to medicinecraigslist.org and just found a random listing of a guy selling glycerin. And he sold a lot, and with the first few batches, nothing really bad happened. He was using the same product, just one was medical grade, one was industrial grade. He was still selling glycerin, just a cheaper glycerin. But in an effort to find an even cheaper substitute to increase his profit margins, he found out about diethylene glycol. He found this in his chemistry book, another odorless syrup, which sold for about $800 a ton instead of $1,800 a ton that the pharmaceutical-grade glycerin sold for. So he found a way to manufacture this stuff that cost $800 a ton and told everybody it was the stuff that cost $1,800 a ton. And this is where shit goes wrong. You know, he's not just using industrial glycerin now, he's using lethal shit. One investigator said Wang knew it was dangerous but didn't know it was lethal, and Puigihar Pharmaceutical, one of Wang's repeat customers, used the deadly syrup in at least 5 drugs: a gallbladder medication, and an enema fluid for children, an injection for blood vessel diseases, and an arthritis medication. And also it was put into an IV pain reliever. So this stuff is everywhere. It's not just in cough syrup. These people are putting it in everything. In April 2006, one of South China's finest hospitals began administering the gallbladder medication. Within a month, 18 people had died from it. At the same time, 9,000 miles away, Panama was gearing up for its upcoming cold season by making an antihistamine containing the same syrup. By September 2007, patients began having symptoms of Guillain-Barré. Again, I don't look up pronunciations. I hit it raw, man. I just know the text. Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that starts as tingling in the legs and spreads to paralysis. However, these patients also lost the ability to urinate, a symptom not associated with the suspected disease. Even more unusual was the sheer number of cases, at least 8 in 2 weeks. That's not really rare for a rare disease. Doctors sought the help of infectious disease specialist Nestor Sosa. By the time Sosa arrived, the death rate of those with the mystery illness was at 50%, and the infected were separated from the general patient population with elevated precautions ordered to all medical staff. Inspired by witnessing the death toll of the hantavirus years earlier, Sosa got right to work trying to crack the case. He worked around the clock comparing doctors' notes and scouring medical records. Meanwhile, patients kept pouring in and they kept dying. When reports of the symptoms started popping up all around the country, Sosa knew it wasn't a localized outbreak. It was first thought that the blood pressure medication lisinopril was to blame, but was later ruled out as some of the dead had not taken that medication. However, it did play an important role in discovering the source of the deaths. Dr. Sosa noticed that lisinopril gave many patients a cough that they were then given cough syrup for. Members of the American CDC assisting Dr. Sosa sent samples of the syrup. Oh my God, my S's for these 2 episodes are going to be... Sosa sent samples of syrup. The CDC assisting Dr. Sosa sent samples of the syrup to the U.S. for testing, and word came back on October 11th that diethylene glycol had been found in the syrup. A nationwide campaign to find and discard of the lethal medication began right away. However, as is the case with less modernized countries, many bottles were unaccounted for or otherwise couldn't be located. After what remained of the medication had been rounded up and destroyed, it was time to count the dead. But that would prove impossible, as many had been buried before the cause was discovered, and even more would have simply never sought medical attention. Some bodies were exhumed for testing, and 7 out of 9 tested positive for the poison. Panamanians wanting to see where their toxic nightmare began could look up the website of the company in Xinjiang, China, that investigators in 4 countries have identified as having made the syrup. The Taizing Glycerin Factory. There, under the words "About Us," they would see a picture of a modern white building nearly a dozen stories tall, adorned by 3 arches at the entrance. The factory, the website boasts, can strictly obey the contract and keep its word. But like the factory's syrup, all is not as it seemed. There are no tall buildings in Xinjiang, a country town with 1 main road. The factory is not certified to sell any medical ingredients. And it looks nothing like the picture on the internet. In reality, its chemicals are mixed in a plain 1-story brick building. The factory is in a walled compound surrounded by small shops and farms. Near the front gate, a sign over the road warns, "Beware of counterfeits." But that sign was said to have been posted by a nearby noodle machine factory that appears to be worried about competition. The Taizing Glycerin Factory brought its diethylene glycol from the same manufacturer as Mr. Wang, the former tailor. From this spot in China's chemical country, the 46 barrels of toxic syrup began their journey, passing from company to company, port to port, and country to country, apparently without anyone testing their contents. Traders should be thoroughly familiar with their suppliers, United States health officials say. One simply does not assume that what is labeled is indeed what it is. In the Panama case, names of suppliers were removed from shipping documents as they passed from one entity to the next. This is a practice some traders use to prevent customers from bypassing them on future purchases, but it also hides the provenance of the product. The first distributor was the Beijing trading company CNSC, a unit of state-owned businesses that began by supplying goods and services to Chinese personnel and business officials overseas. As China's market reach expanded, this company focused its business on pharmaceutical ingredients, and in 2003 it brokered the sale of the suspect syrup made by the Taizing Glycerin Factory. The manufacturer's certificate of analysis showed the batch to be 99.5% pure. Whether the glycerin factory actually performed this test or not hasn't been publicly disclosed, but no, it didn't. Original certificates of analysis should be passed on to each new buyer, said Kevin J. McGlue, a board member of the International Pharmaceutical Excipients Council. In this case, that was not done. CNSC translated the certificate into English, putting its name, not the Taizing Glycerin Factories, at the top of the document. Before shipping the barrels to a second trading company, this one in Barcelona, Lee Can, managing director at CNSC, said he did not remember the transaction and could not comment, adding, "There is a high volume of trade." Upon receiving the barrels in September 2003, the Spanish company, Rasfer International, did not test the contents either. It copied the chemical analysis provided by the original company, then put its logo on it. Ascension Criado, Rasfer's manager, said in an email response to questions about the incident that CNSC did not say where the syrup came from. They didn't say who made it. And these guys just took it. Some Chinese company, a company in another country, sends you a like how many barrels of chemicals, and they're like, okay, here you go, and they don't tell you where it came from, and you're just going to ship it on anyway, knowing it's going to be used in medicine. Again, companies dropping the ball, not verifying where stuff came from, not verifying that it's been tested, not running their own tests to see what's in it. Rasfer shipped the barrels of the syrup to its Panamanian broker, the Medicom Business Group. Medicom never asked us for the name of the manufacturer as far as Rasfer is concerned. They're saying that Medicom in Panama never asked for any information. A lawyer for Medicom said his client was a victim too. They were tricked by somebody, he said. They operated in good faith. And in Panama, the barrels sat unused for more than 2 years because Medicom improperly changed the expiration date on the syrup. So not only was this stuff toxic, it was expired. And since it sat there for 2 years, there's no way connecting it to any major outbreak in other countries is going to be harder because the other countries probably use this stuff right away. So where stuff didn't break out in Panama until 2007, this could have been going on since 2003 in other parts of the world, and it's just not able to be connected. During the 2 years the company had the product, it never tested it, and the Panamanian government, which bought the 46 barrels and used them to make cold medicine, also failed to detect the poison. The toxic pipeline ultimately emptied into the bloodstream of people like Ernesto Osorio, a former high school teacher in Panama City. He spent 2 months in the hospital after ingesting poison cough syrup that September. Just before Christmas, after a kidney dialysis treatment, he stood outside the city's public hospital in a tear-splattered shirt, describing what his life had become. "I'm not an eighth of what I used to be," Mr. Osorio said. His partially paralyzed face hung like a slab of meat. "I have trouble walking. Look at my face. Look at my tears." The tears were not from emotion, but from nerve damage, and yet Mr. Osorio knows he is one of the lucky victims. "They didn't know how to keep the killer out of the medicine," he said simply. While the suffering in Panama was great, the potential profit, at least for the Spanish trading company Rasfer, was surprisingly small. For the 46 barrels of glycerin, Rasfer paid CNSC $9,900 and sold them to Medicom for $11,322. So this company didn't even make $3,000 off the transfer. How many hundreds of people dead for them to make less than $3,000? Chinese authorities have not disclosed how much the Taizing glycerin factory made on their end or how much they knew about what was in the barrels. "The fault has to be traced back to areas of production," said Dr. Mata, the cardiologist in Panama who helped uncover the source of the epidemic. "This was my plea. Please, this thing is happening to us. Make sure whoever did this down the line isn't doing it to Peru or Sierra Leone or some other place." The power to prosecute the counterfeiters is now on the hands of the Chinese. The government moved quickly against Mr. Wang, the former tailor who poisoned Chinese residents. So see, like I said, this is happening in other places. It's not just Panama. This guy's stuff went to other people in China and was poisoning them there through way more than just one kind of medication. I mean, they keep trying to trace this all back to the manufacturer who originally used the syrup, this CNSC or whatever. Or no, CNSC was the Chinese distributor, the Taizing glycerin factory. Yeah, they're trying to trace it all back to the factory that manufactured the overall syrup, not even going back to the guy who supplied that factory. That was Wang. That was Wang and his fucking glycol that he labeled glycerin and gave to the manufacturer, the glycerin factory, who then gave it to their distributor, who sent it to a Spanish distributor, who sent it to a Panama distributor, who sold it to the government. This chain is so fucking long, so many balls dropped along the way. China is at least trying to get it right and saying, "Oh yeah, Wang, what's up with this guy?" They moved against him quickly, caught up with him at a roadblock somewhere, pulled him out of his car. It looked like he was trying to leave the country, He was found to be weak and sick and had not eaten in 2 days. Inside his white sedan was a bank book and cash. He had fled without his wife and teenage son. Chinese patients were dead, a political scandal was brewing, and the authorities wanted answers. Mr. Wang was taken to a hospital. Then, in long sessions with investigators, he gave them what they wanted, explaining his scheme, how he tested the industrial syrup by drinking it, and how he decided to use diethylene glycol, and how he conned pharmaceutical companies into buying his syrup. So he gave it all up. At least he tried to cooperate. Which, from the things I kind of read about what he had said and what his brother said, that he didn't mean to hurt anybody. He was just an idiot trying to make some easy cash, and he did it in the worst way possible. He made a fortune, but none of it went to his family. A former village official who knows Mr. Wang and his siblings said he liked to gamble. Mr. Wang remains in custody as the authorities decide whether he should be put to his death. The drug plant that made the poisonous medicine has been closed, and 5 employees are now being prosecuted for causing a serious accident. In contrast to the Wang Guiping investigation, Chinese authorities have been tentative in acknowledging China's link to the Panama tragedy, which involved a state-owned trading company. No one in China has been charged with committing the fraud that ended up killing so many in Panama. So China they're doing something against Wang, and they're doing something against the glycerin factory. But that's, as far as China's concerned, that's where it stops. They're saying they have nothing to do with anything else that happened in the world. And China's kind of like that. A lot of these more Asian countries tend to be, it seems like they will handle stuff within their borders. But if somebody inside their borders fucked your shit up somewhere else in the world, they are notoriously hard to get information from. They do not cooperate, so it's really hard to pursue these kind of offenses from an outside legal standpoint. Like, if you're outside China, you're good luck charging someone there. The country, China's saying that they can't prove that it has anything to do with the deaths in the other part of the world. As of 2016, it was suspected that as many as 10,000 Panamanians died from taking the syrup. 23 people were charged in Panama courts, with 11 of them being prosecuted. One was sentenced to 5 years, and 4 others were sentenced to a year for their role in obscuring the contents of the barrels once they entered Panama. So the Panamanian government did take action against the people at Medicom, basically, because even though a lot of stuff had happened to send things in the wrong direction up until the point that it got to Panama, once it hit Panama, it was Medicom's problem, and they dropped the ball just as much as all the other companies had. And it looks like some of them did go to jail. Still, though, 1 person got 5 years and 4 got a year. Doesn't seem right. Doesn't seem harsh enough. In China, Wang was convicted of the murder of 14 Chinese citizens who had consumed medicine laced with the toxic syrup, and sentenced to life in prison and given a fine of about 58,000 American dollars. So in this case, the perpetrator was taken to trial and is paying for his role in the deaths, but not really. China only convicted him of confirmed cases of poisoning in their country. There were more that he just wasn't connected to, that the Chinese government won't acknowledge he's connected to. They know he did it. They can prove it. They have the evidence. To me, if I was China, I'd put him on a boat and send him over to Panama and just let him shoot the guy in the head. But I don't run China or Panama. Oversight of medical and pharmaceutical regulations in China has been described by many as a quote-unquote black hole, and chemical counterfeiting is big business for a lot of people there. And all I can say is be careful taking your medication. Like I said in the last episode, and maybe take 1 dose and see how you feel before taking another one. China doesn't give a fuck about your safety, and the U.S. bodies responsible for catching stuff like this before it happens are either too busy or too inefficient to catch everything. I mean, they caught 50, what did they say, 50 tons of it, or 50 gallons, I can't remember now, back in 95, they caught it. So, in America, they are trying to do something about it. They're trying to catch it, but you can't catch everything. I mean, if you could catch everything, we wouldn't have heroin. You know what I'm saying? Stuff falls through the cracks. You can't be all places at all times. So just be careful out there. And this is the part where I would usually do 5 fast facts, but I'm not going to do that on this episode. I've got at least 2 more stories to get through, so I'm just going to get right into the next one. AIDS. To quote Team America, everybody has AIDS. Well, not everybody, but definitely everyone who's ever received a transfusion of blood with AIDS in it. How scary is that? We're about to find out. Nippon, that's Japan, if you didn't know. 1980s Japan. Japan did not have any official reports of HIV until 1985, 4 years after the illness was identified in Los Angeles and was diagnosed in a Japanese artist that had spent some time living in New York. There is some speculation that the first AIDS patient in Japan was a hemophiliac who had died in 1983 from tainted blood products, but it's suspected that there was a government cover-up in that because it would put HIV-tainted products dating back into the 70s, and that wouldn't look good for them. But that hasn't been confirmed, so as far as we know, first official case of HIV in Japan, 1985. In 1983, Japan's Ministry of Health and Welfare was informed about a U.S.-licensed heat-treated blood product that could kill HIV in blood. When overtures were made to license the product in Japan, the country's chief provider of blood products, Green Cross Corporation, strongly objected, stating that the product would provide unfair competition by their competitors as they, the Green Cross Corp., refused to explore treat-heated alternatives. It would make the cost of production too expensive. So the heat-treated products were not taken up, and the Japanese Ministry of Health at the time acted by ordering that untreated blood products be screened for HIV before use. This order wasn't put in place until late 1986, years after the dangers of HIV and AIDS were known. In the meantime, Green Cross Corp., content that their products were fine for use by their patients, most of whom were hemophiliacs, assured the public that their blood products were perfectly safe, which they were, until they weren't, and up to 2,000 hemophiliac patients contracted HIV from tainted blood. Whoa, tainted blood, don't touch me, please, I do not want a blood disease, tainted blood. I have Asperger's, and sometimes I say and do things that aren't deemed socially acceptable, like singing tainted blood during a story about AIDS patients. Get off my back. Okay, so we have it all laid out right from the start. America pioneered a heat treatment to ensure blood donations would be safe. It kills off the HIV in the blood. Whoever owned the technology said, hey, Japan, do you guys want to pick this up for a little licensing fee? The main company that should have been using this technology threw a fit and said it would cost too much, and they kept selling untreated blood products. Fairly simple and straightforward way to, once again, corporate negligence. No, we're not worried about this disease. No, we don't want to pay to make things safe, and they just keep slinging blood, whether it has HIV in it or not. My saying a little dropping the ball is probably getting a little old. These guys didn't drop the ball. They just never picked it up. And who's going to pay the price for this company's stinginess? The patients, mostly hemophiliacs, people who depend on blood and plasma products to save their lives. People for whom, without these treatments, their only option is to stay in a house wrapped in bubble wrap? Like, you can't... Hemophilia, it sounds simple, like, they put a Band-Aid on it. They don't stop bleeding as soon as other people do. But really, they live a life where a scratch in the right place can cause them to bleed to death. It's really serious. 1,800 of them were confirmed, 1,800 hemophiliac patients, and in Japan, that's 40% of their hemophiliac population. I mean, this, like it said in the beginning, Green Cross Corp was the primary provider of blood products in Japan, so much so they had 40% of the hemophiliac market. Luckily for the other 60%, there was a lot of heat-treated blood clotting factors imported from the U.S. during this time, so that other part of the market that Green Cross didn't have cornered was being given the heat-treated American products. Unfortunately, there's not much of a timeline on this story to follow. It happened over several years, with cases being found sporadically, like no one connected the dots until way later. So there wasn't any one story I could follow to be like, little Timmy received blood products for his hemophilia, and a few days later, no storyline, just facts. Facts. AIDS was a thing. Fact. A major manufacturer of blood products refused to heat treat its supply. Fact. 1,800 to 2,000 people got AIDS. Facts, hemophiliacs started being treated like garbage people because they were the only ones in the country to have AIDS. Japan didn't have AIDS until the tainted blood products. And the tainted blood products were given to hemophiliacs. So kind of how early in the AIDS epidemic in the US, everybody started treating gay people like shit. Like, I mean, they did already, but looking at them as like, oh, you're gay, you have AIDS, so gay equals AIDS, AIDS equals gay, let's treat them like shit. In Japan, that's how they started treating hemophiliacs. They were looked at as dirty disease carriers. They were denied jobs, denied entry to school, denied medical care, dental work, looked down upon by neighbors. Some people wouldn't rent them houses. They were chased out of neighborhoods in some cases. Even if they were part of the 60% who weren't given the tainted blood products, AIDS and hemophilia became so associated in Japan that all hemophiliacs were treated like shit, even if they weren't sick. Like, you had to provide papers. If you were a hemophiliac, if you wanted medical treatment, you wanted to enroll in a school, you had to provide papers that said, hey, I've been tested, I don't have AIDS. And then, once that number got so high, up to 2,000 people, someone had to be held responsible. But who? A CBS article from 2000 stated the following. 3 former drug company executives accused of selling blood products tainted with the virus that caused AIDS were convicted and given brief prison terms. The convictions were the first in a wide-ranging tainted blood scandal that shook Japan's powerful bureaucracy and pharmaceutical industry in the late 1980s. About 1,800 hemophiliacs were infected and an estimated 500 have died. The 3 were top executives of the company at the center of the scandal, Green Cross Corp. They were tried over the AIDS-related death of a liver patient. Renzo Matsushita, 79, Tadakazu Suyama, 72, and Taihiko Kawano, 69, were accused of permitting the sale of unheated blood clotting agents known to carry the risk of infection with HIV. All 3 pled guilty in 1997. Matsushita, a former Health and Welfare Ministry official, was given a 2-year term. Suyama received 18 months and Kawano received 16 months. Some critics were disappointed at the short prison terms. Ryuhei Kawada, a hemophiliac infected with HIV from tainted blood products and one of the plaintiffs in a civil suit against Green Cross, said the punishment was insufficient. I cannot but feel anger, he told reporters. The scandal triggered public outrage against the drug industry and government officials charged with regulating it. It resulted in the prosecution of a former bureaucrat and an advisor to the government on AIDS policy. No decisions have been reached in those cases. The scandal centered on the company's failure to heat treat imported blood products despite the widespread knowledge at the time that untreated blood could transmit HIV. By 1985, the government already had approved safe heat-treated coagulants, but Green Cross continued to sell its supplies because it faced losing money if it dumped the inventory of untreated products. Again, corporate negligence, coming down to money. How can I make a few extra dollars here? How can we save a few extra dollars there? Oh, I know, we'll do this and this and this and just kill a bunch of people in the process. We're not worried about people. People's not the point here. We're worried about money. The 3 defendants approved the sale of unsterilized blood products in March 1985 and did not recall the products even after the company began selling heated agents in 1986. So eventually the Japanese government forced all companies making blood products to use this heat treatment. They just kept selling it anyway. Like, up to the point where the government told everybody, up to 1986, and then even after, okay, as of today, January 1st, 1986, this shit needs to be heat treated. They didn't bother recalling any of the untreated stuff out there. The company did say, we take the ruling seriously and we will do our utmost not to cause damage by products again. Oh, well, that's nice. They won't do it again. 1,800 people already have AIDS. 500 of them are dead, at least. You won't do it again. That's fine, right? It's fine. 3 years, fine. No, dude, fuck these people. Fuck these companies. Tokyo and Osaka courts jointly recommended an out-of-court settlement in which each plaintiff would receive 45 million yen, approximately $450,000 in 1996 American dollars, with payment divided 60-40 between the pharmaceutical companies and the government. The court justified its urging of a settlement by declaring its sympathy for infected hemophiliacs. As victims of discrimination, unable to receive care for HIV infections, fearful of disclosing their names and addresses, hemophiliacs were dying from a tragedy for which they bore no responsibility. Conversely, under the Pharmaceutical Affairs Law, the Ministry of Health and Welfare was responsible for protecting Japanese citizens from drug side effects, and the manufacturers of pharmaceuticals had the responsibility to sell safe products. So the government's saying, hey, we were supposed to oversee this, we didn't, our bad, we'll cover 40% of this. Good to see somebody stepping up. But the company stepped up, didn't step up rather, and said, why should we have to pay 60% of this? They tried to put it all on the government, and my phone is ringing. I signed up for a thing to win a Best Buy gift card when I went to a concert last year, and I get a call about 3 times a day asking if I want a free vacation in exchange for listening to a timeshare pitch. Each person gets just under what would have been $500,000 in 1996. The government's footing 40% of the bill, and the pharmaceutical companies are complaining that they have to pay for it. Meanwhile, I'm sure by the time I'm telling you this story, the people in Japan are probably a little more woke about HIV and AIDS, and maybe some of these people can get medical care now, but like the stats said at the time of this one article, 500 of them had already died, and they were dying because medical professionals didn't want to touch them. They sat at home and rotted from HIV and AIDS complications because Japanese doctors refused to treat them. You know, it's just it's ridiculous. Like this, if you run a pharmaceutical company, the second you hear there's this great new technology that's going to make things better for patients, don't you adopt that like as soon as possible that day, the day before, if you could go back in time and do it? Why would you fight providing a safer product to people? It might be more expensive, it might be a pain in the ass to put into production, but you're gonna come out on top of that because doctors are gonna know, oh, this company has that new. This company is really safe. This company isn't going to kill my patient. And then you get repeat business. I don't understand why they thought not heat treating the blood was going to be more profitable. Maybe like in the short term, like that fiscal quarter, yes, you will keep costs down. But over the span of however many years, no, you're losing money by not adapting to new technology. And in the end, they really not only did they lose however many millions they have to pay out to all these patients and take a reputation hit, which means less business for them now, but then they also spent 16 to 3 years in jail. So, okay, so anyway, yeah, that's the story of the HIV-tainted blood in Japan. Moving on to our last story for the day, and then we'll get out of here. Thalidomide. What is thalidomide? Put simply, it's a toxic substance. It's poisonous to people. If you've ever seen the brilliant movie, The Big Nothing, with who's the guy that plays Shaun from Shaun of the Dead? I know his name, but I can't think of it right now. David Schwimmer, who played Ross on Friends, and Alice Eve. Alice Eve's character is a serial killer who kills people with thalidomide. That's how she takes people out, poisons them with thalidomide. And that's a great movie. Not trying to get off topic, but if you've never seen The Big Nothing, go check it out. Thalidomide, also mentioned in Slipknot lyrics. I can't stand to see your thalidomide robot face. And dude, if you want to hear some good talking, if you like podcasts, listen to a Corey Taylor audiobook. I could seriously listen to that guy talk every second until I die. But anyway, thalidomide. You know it from that movie. You've heard it mentioned in that song, but it's a drug used in certain cancer and leprosy treatments. Heavy-duty shit that when not used properly or in the right doses can kill you dead, as opposed to killing you alive, I guess. I've never really thought about it. Killed them dead. Just killed them. One of those words is not necessary. When it was first discovered, it was marketed as a sedative that cured anxiety, insomnia, gastritis, tension, nausea, and morning sickness. It was available over the counter in 1950s Germany and quickly after its discovery in places all over the world. When used improperly, thalidomide can cause excessive blood clots, interferes with creation of blood cells, causes anemia, damages nerves, causes neuropathy, heart attacks, hypertension, liver damage, skin reactions, prevents menstruation, causes tremors, dizziness, tingling, numbness, constipation, edema, depression, reduced coordination, heart failure, difficulty breathing, lung disease, inflammation, vomiting, dry mouth, fever, weakness, and this list goes on. If it is a problem possible with the human body, thalidomide will cause it. But the big one is birth defects. Remember when I said they marketed it as a cure for morning sickness? That was before they saw how deformed and fucked these kids born to the mothers were. It was verified that mothers who didn't take thalidomide until 42 or more days into gestation had kids that turned out to be fine. But if you took this thalidomide medication at any point up to day 41, your kid didn't turn out so well. They were actually able to narrow it down to what days of gestation, what happened. At day 20, central brain damage. At day 21, eye damage. Day 22, the ears and the face. Day 24 to 28, the infamous arm and leg damage. So yeah, at any point between 28 and 41, just more and more of the arm and leg damage. It's unknown how many children were killed or born deformed by the medicine, but it's estimated to be anywhere from 10,000 to 100,000. That's a pretty big gap. So let's just say at least 10,000. In England, the drug was used from 1958 to 1961, causing 2,000 babies to be born with defects, half of which died within a few months, and only 466 survived until at least 2010. And what were these birth defects? Remember the dude from Scary Movie that had the strong arm? The little nubby, stumpy T-Rex arm? That was the main thing. Arm and leg deformities, short, stumpy arms and legs, if they grew at all. Some of them just didn't have them. But that's what thalidomide did to the fetus. Arms and legs were deformed, short, and in many just didn't work. Blindness, deafness, brain damage, and heart defects were also on the menu for any of these kids, assuming that they lived at all. Many died in utero or shortly after birth. Some may have made it a few years. I did read an article about one lady named Mandy Masters, who was one of the luckier victims, was given a lifespan of 19, somehow managed to live to 55 thus far, and went on to even have a family of her own. She's got grandkids, but sadly she is the exception and not the rule. Even given her luck, she still had to use her feet as her hands her entire life, and describes her existence as agony with her sense of well-being rapidly fleeting. So her legs are doing the work of arms and legs, and it's taking a toll on her body, from what I read in the article. Don't know that she'll be making it to 60. And these drugs were used worldwide. They didn't just stay in Germany. Chemie Grunenthal was the company that pioneered the drug and sold it around the world, but most modernized countries also began producing their own thalidomide stocks, increasing the availability of the drug. In America, the FDA refused to approve it. Oh my God, so great, because America would have been the country it was used most in. Don't we have the most spoiled people here in America compared to other countries? So many moms would have been asking to buy this over-the-counter morning sickness pill. But the FDA, they ran trials. 17 kids were born defected, and they said, no, we're not selling this shit. So there was 17 kids born with deformities due to that testing, but nothing happened here in America like it did in other parts of the world. And in Germany, this was a really big thing because that's where it came from. That's where it was cheapest. That's where it was readily available. I was hoping to find a definite number of deaths related to this so I could get mad about it, but without knowing how many moms took the medication, again, it was over the counter and records weren't really kept as far as over-the-counter medicines like they are nowadays. But I really think in this case, it's not the death that's the tragic part. I mean, the deaths are tragic without a doubt, but the shittier part of this story is tens of thousands of kids born with deformed arms or no arms at all, gnarled legs, blind, deaf, and heart problems. These are people that have had to live their whole lives, however short or long, dealing with this, being punished because their mom took a medication she shouldn't have taken, because she was lied to by doctors and drug companies that she was taught to trust. Remember, this is the 50s when a lot of people still thought that the government and big companies and scientists were trustworthy and infallible. I mean, they took it willingly, trustingly, and then look what happened. As has happened within the other ones, we have to hold someone accountable, right? So who is that in this case? Each country took its own course of action. In 1968, after a long campaign by the Sunday Times, the United Kingdom set up a compensation settlement for the victims that was reached with a Distillers Company, the local distributor of thalidomide drugs in the UK. This compensation, which is distributed by the Thalidomide Trust, was substantially increased in 2005. That's right, this is still happening. Some of these people are still alive. Each victim gets £20 million. In Australia, a Melbourne woman, Lynette Rowe, who was born without limbs, led an Australian class action lawsuit against the drug's manufacturer Grünenthal, which fought to have the case heard in Germany. The Supreme Court of Victoria dismissed that application in 2012, and the case was heard in Australia. In July of 2012, Rowe was awarded an out-of-court settlement believed to be in the millions of dollars and paving the way for class action victims to receive further compensation. In 2014, the Supreme Court of Victoria endorsed the settlement of 89 million Australian dollars to 107 victims in Australia and New Zealand. In Canada, the drug thalidomide's birth defects in children affected many people's lives, and from these events came the formation of the group called the Thalidomide Victims Association of Canada, a group of 120 Canadian survivors. Their goal was to prevent future usage of drugs that could be of potential harm to mothers and their babies. The members of the Thalidomide Victims Association were involved in the STEPS program, which aimed to prevent teratogenicity. I'm sure that has to do with something with poisoning fetuses. So looking at the brief little clip I have of what happened here in Canada, it sounds like the people there pushed more for reform and stronger oversight of the medications. I don't see anything about how much they were actually awarded, or if anything. There is an annual benefits package from the government of Canada, but you have to provide documentation that you actually are suffering from the thalidomide effects, and it doesn't actually say what those benefits are. But it sounds like if you're a victim of thalidomide poisoning in Canada, you get a yearly check. In the U.S., well, there wasn't really much going on in the U.S. other than the testing that happened because the FDA didn't approve it here. But there is a little bit of a clip as far as what happened on the U.S. side of things with this. FDA pharmacologist Francis Oldham Kelsey received the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service from JFK for blocking the sale and approval of thalidomide in the U.S., for correctly denying the application despite the pressure from Richardson Merrill, which was a pharmaceutical company trying to get the thalidomide products sold here. Kelsey eventually received the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service in 1962. In 2010, the FDA honored her with the first Kelsey Award, given annually to an FDA staff member. This came 50 years after she turned down the approval for the drugs. So that's it. Yeah, people in other countries got punished, people got poisoned, and people got settlements. In the U.S., somebody got an award for not approving it. And again, man, I'm not ragging on our government or their various groups and departments and committees. I know running a country is a big task, especially for people as spoiled as us Americans, but it's just Oxycontin, man. Okay, the opioid epidemic sweeping the country is being caused, yes, by doctors who prescribe that many medications, but the FDA lets these medications be here to begin with. They authorize them for sale and distribution and manufacture. I just find it hard to believe that there was a time when they would say, hey, this is dangerous. And where did those balls go now? And it's not even a matter of balls. How about compassion and common sense? Where is it? Like, at one time they stood up and said, no, you're not going to give our babies strong arms. Would they do that today? Or would they take the little payola from the pharmaceutical company and say, oh, this is cool, just sell it, we don't care, Because that's really how it feels these days. There's an opioid crisis sweeping through our country, okay? People are finding babies sitting in sweltering cars in parking lots an inch from death because their parents shot up and fucking OD'd in the front seat before going in or into Walmart, man. It's crazy. They could step in at any point and say, guess what? This is illegal now. You can't sell this anymore. But they don't. So yes, my mind is boggled by a time when they would stand up for us, when they would look out for us. And I don't mean to talk bad about our government. I work for them. Obviously, I've said that before. I work on a Department of Defense contract, but for as shitty as a lot of the stuff about the old times were, there were some really good parts of it that we should bring back as a country, as a culture, as a society, as individual people, man. Damn right that lady got an award, as she should have. Anyway, getting off on a rant. That's it. That's the stories. Bad Medicine, Part 2. Thank you for tuning in. Blah, 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 No Better Death, blah, 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 iTunes, blah, 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 Facebook. You already know by now, nobetterdeath.info for all info on No Better Death. Links to everything and everywhere we are right there on the page. Visit the Facebook or the Twitter to keep up with your daily doses of death. Email us at nobetterdeath@gmail.com with your thoughts on the show, death-related stories you may have, stories you'd like to hear on the show. And if you only ever do one thing for me, please leave an iTunes review. It really helps out more than you know. Unless you're a podcaster, then you know how much it does help out. But yeah, we're out there. No Better Death. I am your host, Sick Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.